Love your enemy, do good to those that harm you, and praise for those that despitefully use you and persecute you. Those are the words of Jesus. Those are from the King James Bible that people are so familiar with in my generation. That is the heart and soul of what Jesus had to teach. And he was, of course, in the tradition of the great Jewish Rabbi Hillel, who said that the essence of the teachings of all the scriptures was, love your neighbor as yourself. All the rest is commentary. Jesus, of course, is taking that even to another stage by saying you should love your enemy. I suppose that, like myself, we're all thrilled with this idea of loving our enemy, but how on earth do we do this? I think for us people in the modern world, in order to even think of how to accomplish something like that, we need a practice that we can improve day by day to get this capacity going and building and expanding inside ourselves. And I think for people like myself, at least, I think we need, in addition to a practice, which we absolutely need, we also need a vision, or at least a model, that could help us make sense of this tremendously challenging, tremendously inspiring idea of loving our enemy. And Mahatma Gandhi was pretty good at coming up with visions and ideas and models, and in this particular instance he came up with a model which is deceptively simple, which I think really makes loving your enemy a practical possibility for most of us. And he called that model heart unity. Very, very simple idea, very, as I say, deceptively simple. And how did it work? The way it worked was you had to find the heart of commonality where you are one with others, even if they are your opponent at a given period of time, for a long period of time, even if you have tended to regard them as an enemy, even if they regard you as an enemy. You have to find that heart unity between the two of you. And once you have found that, by loving that, you can encompass and embrace all the differences. And then the differences of the really conflictual differences, where someone wants you to suffer in the mistaken idea that it'll make them happy, or someone wants you to suffer because you're in the way of their happiness. All those things become seen as an illusion. So the key to heart unity is to understand that the human being has a depth, which he's calling a heart, and that we can find unity at that heart level without eradicating or overlooking the diversity on the surface level. That's really the key. And in fact, that diversity on the surface becomes then supported by that unity of heart. Without having a grasp on that unity of heart, those differences that are on the surface, that diversity, they start to become threatening, they start to become disunity. Now, the way Gandhiji applied this great model, for example, was in the conflict that was the most difficult for him to deal with, the conflict between Hindus and Muslims. He said, our Muslim brothers need to be respected for who they are, and we need not to try to bring them into our fold, because we have the vision, we have the faith that operates in two ways. It tells us that their success will bring them to the same place that our success will bring us, and that their success, secondly, not only is not in conflict with our success, it is a complement to our success. Once we understand what success really means, success being fulfillment of that heart, not acquisition of material possessions and so forth. And Martin Luther King said this beautifully, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. So far from being able to achieve fulfillment at the expense of others, we can only really find fulfillment in trying to satisfy, trying to help others realize their fulfillment. Their fulfillment is our fulfillment. That is the core of this very simple idea of Gandhi's called heart unity, and this is how it makes the great demand of loving your enemy at least achievable by degrees over the period of time for all of us who sincerely strive to achieve it. And just to show you that Mahatma Gandhi was not alone in this, that this is really the great teaching that underlies all the world's traditions, I'm going to read you a section from a Buddhist text called the Sutta Nipata. It's a section called the Discourse on Goodwill that appears in a collection by Sri Eknath Ishran, who was my spiritual teacher. The collection is called God Makes the Rivers to Flow. And here's the translation. I'm going to stop here and there and make a bit of a comment if you don't mind, but if you get hold of this book, God Makes the Rivers to Flow, this is page 104, and I believe it's on the website of the Blue Mountain Center of Meditation, which is ishwaran.org, www.eas, as in Sam, waran.org. Here's how it starts. May all beings be filled with joy and peace. See, if you're a real lover of peace, if you're a real lover of liberty, as Martin Luther King pointed out, as Gandhi pointed out, you need to love them for everybody. You need to have the faith that your joy, your liberty, your peace is not going to be in conflict with my joy, my liberty, my peace. Quite the contrary. Okay. Now let's look at the immediate transition from this thing that we all have in common, this joy and peace, to the diversity of life. Here we go. May all beings be filled with joy and peace. May all beings everywhere, the strong and the weak, the great and the small, the mean and the powerful, the short and the long, the subtle and the gross, may all beings everywhere, seen and unseen, dwelling far off or nearby, being or waiting to become, may all be filled with lasting joy. Let no one deceive another. Let no one anywhere despise another. Let no one, out of anger or resentment, wish suffering on anyone at all, because those are the violations of that unity. Now here's the climax. Just as a mother, with her own life, protects her child, her only child, from harm, so within yourself let grow a boundless love for all creatures. Let your love flow outward through the universe, its height, its depth, its broad extent, a limitless love without hatred or enmity. Then, as you stand or walk, sit or lie down, as long as you are awake, strive for this with a one-pointed mind. Your life will bring heaven on earth. Thank you very much.